Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody at the panel table and in the broader room to this Concordia strategic dialogue session, in which we will explore how companies can implement strategic, action-oriented, and profitable sustainability efforts. My name is Patrick Ducasse. I'm a managing director and a senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. I'm based in Europe, in Paris, and I'm actually working across a number of sectors, countries, and geographies. And very recently, of course, I've been very interested in looking at how companies are actually putting societal impact at the center of their strategies. In consumer and retail, the sector I'm working in, we can see companies actively transforming themselves to the challenge of consumer and society at large, demanding healthier and more sustainable products. BCG's research has demonstrated how the concept of total societal impact, TSI, which my colleague Shalini will explain in a few more minutes, can help companies achieve solutions that are not only doing good for society, but also achieving valuation and margin improvements that are benefiting shareholder value as well. However, companies in the day-to-day are experiencing challenges in translating strategies into concrete impact. And we'd like, in this session, to spend our time discussing that with each of you, making sure that we draw on the learnings of your experience and share how you came out to fight some of those skepticism, obstacles, challenges in the day-to-day life. Before we enter the dialogue, I would like to hand over to Shalini to describe a little bit more the concept of total societal impact and the research that we've been conducting on that topic. And we'll come back for a set of much more directed questions.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. My name is Shalini Unnikrishnan. I'm a managing director and partner at the Boston Consulting Group, and I'm based out of Chicago. I lead our work at the intersection of consumer goods and retail and social impact globally. A couple of years ago, some of my colleagues and I put out a publication and talked about that intersection of societal impact in business, and we called it Total Societal Impact, a new lens for strategy. And the fundamental premise was that societal impact actions can no longer remain on the side of business. It is no longer, CSR is no longer sufficient, but that that lens on environmental, social, and governance topics need to be at the core of the operations and the core of the strategy of the business. And in keeping it at the center of the plate, businesses can not only create meaningful and substantial societal impact, but can also unlock business value. In that work, we conducted an analysis across multiple industries and looked at the companies that were actually leading their industry on environmental, social, and governance indicators. The top decile in each industry, we were wondering, do they actually get benefits from investors and in their margins? And what we found was that consistently across industry, the top decile players compared to the median were getting a valuation bump in some industries as much as 19%, and a bump in the margins that they were able to experience. Around the same time, and even before, many of you around this table had already articulated what your societal impact ambitions are, and were working hard at it. Many of our clients were doing the same. And what we found and what we have been finding is the ambition is there, operationalizing it is really challenging. And what we wanted to do today is to have an open, honest, candid dialogue about some of those challenges. We've identified three that we can have a discussion around. The first of which is maybe one that all of you feel very closely. With large corporations that span geographies, that span different types of businesses, et cetera, translating the global ambition or the central ambition of the CEO and the leadership down to the markets, down to all parts of your organization has been challenging for many corporations. And part of this is because some of these changes are transformative and require significant changes to current business models. Some of you at this table and others that I work with on the question of plastic packaging and how to manage that will understand what I'm talking about when we say it affects almost every part of your business when you make a decision to change the packaging that your product is in. The second that we will talk about, and several around this table are involved in some leading and innovative and bold coalitions and partnerships between public and private sector, across the private sector, et cetera. Many of these coalitions have huge ambitions, they have great promise, but getting them to scale and getting them beyond a pilot to real impact is challenging. And I'd like to open up that conversation to that question. We at BCG, for instance, support FRESH, Food Reform for Sustainability and Health, which is a coalition of businesses underneath the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and a coalition of about 40 plus CEOs. We also support the Consumer Goods Forum and the Collaboration for Healthier Lives, a coalition deployed in 10 markets, focusing on driving healthier baskets, awareness, and local KPIs. And all of these types of coalitions have huge potential, and we want to think about how to operationalize them well. The last one is measuring and communicating impact. While the movement in the industry, as judged by the recent statement of the Business Roundtable in the US, makes it clear that CEOs are coming on board increasingly that this is critical, but measuring the impact of your actions, figuring out what is working and not working, making the business case internally and to investors, consumers, governments, et cetera, is challenging, and that's the last piece. And finally, across all of these, we will explore the role that digital can play, if you think any, and I would welcome all types of inputs on that, to unlock some of these challenges. With that, Patrick, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So let's get started on the dialogue, and maybe for the first question on leading global companies, how do you experiment the challenges and some of the innovative solutions that are required to actually translate a global strategy into very concrete operational impact? I would like maybe to turn to Peter from Novozymes, Andy from Mars, Jesus from Bayer, and potentially Juan Pablo as well, if you please, to discuss a little bit in your own specific experience, what are some of the challenges that you would like to share with us, and maybe the solutions that you brought to make sure that strategy at the global level is translated into concrete results. I don't know who wants to go first, maybe Jesus?
Is this on? Yeah. So good morning, and thanks for inviting me to this important dialogue. Bayer is a company that works in different spaces. One of those is agriculture, and it's super important to us and very relevant for the conversation this morning. I think everyone is quite familiar with the backdrop. Is feeding the world without starving the planet is not a minor challenge. Doing it, protecting biodiversity, adapting to climate change, and taking care of water, soil, and natural resources is a daunting task. And for us, it really starts with innovation. And the way we think about innovation in our companies, every single dollar that we invest in innovation is a dollar invested in sustainability and creating impact. We don't do anything in innovation that doesn't go at the core of creating an impact for farmers, our customers, of course, in terms of their profitability and productivity and improving their lives, an impact to consumers when you think about consumer choices, affordable food and safe food, and an impact to our planet. Because there is no plan B on the planet, and we know that although agriculture has done tremendous progress in the last 2-3 decades, we have a long way to go still to ensure that for the long term, we are part of the solution of protecting our planet. So for us, the key is not about how much we sell, how many products we place in the marketplace, but we're moving more into outcomes. What are the outcomes that we are looking for to meet these three aspects of our goals: farmers, consumers, and the planet? And we've been exploring many alternatives here, but the most important one is we're moving our business model from an input-based business model to an outcome-based business model. What does this mean? It means that we are already in large-scale pilots where instead of just selling products and services, we are going to go to our farmer customers and define together outcomes that benefit on the farmer and Bayer on the upside, but we both take risks on the downside too. As we know, agriculture is not a prescribed activity, and that you have good years and not so good years. And to the point made by Shalini, a great deal of this is being enabled by tremendous progress in innovation that we have seen in genetics, biotechnology, modern crop protection products. But the integrator is the tremendous progress that we've seen in digital and related technologies. Today, we are able to prescribe insights for customers almost per square meter, so that they know exactly what to do on their farm to drive productivity, to save costs, to protect biodiversity, to adapt to climate change. So I think this is a real important transition for us, for agriculture, because it puts the farmer in a more even playing field, with all of us that are on the other side of the innovation place. And it goes without saying that this cannot be done just by Bayer working with farmers. It really requires incredible collaborations, collaborations with governments, collaborations with NGOs, with consumer groups. Over the last year plus since we came together as one company, Bayer and Monsanto, we've embarked in a lot of listening from many, and we heard very clear and loud the expectations that have been placed in our company, in our industry. And it's one of the reasons why we've decided to advance two key and bold commitments. First, to empower and enable 100 million smallholder farmers around the world by 2030, and second, to reduce the environmental impact of agriculture by 30% by 2032. These are not minor commitments, and as you can imagine, we're starting in a place that is not zero, but it's going to take all of us in this table, many of the people outside of this room, to work to make it happen. So let me just pause there and hand it over perhaps to Peter.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think it's an incredibly interesting topic that you tee up, and I mean, we just humble experimenters in Novozymes, but I'll try to give you some of at least my experiences from that field. So maybe first a couple of seconds about Novozymes. It's a mid-size European company, but works globally on industrial biotechnology. So we are in your laundry detergent, we are in the bread you are eating, we are in the beer you are having. We'll probably have been a part of feeding the chicken that you'll have for lunch. We're working with Bayer on bringing better yield propositions to farmers on major row crops, so industrial biotechnology. And when we think about sustainability, to us, I think we crossed the line in, I'm not sure there's a specific timing to it, but around 2013, 14, where we kind of once for all wrestle with the fact that sustainability is not on the side of business. Sustainability is business. So we developed a purpose statement that is centered around sustainability and has a unique Novozymes way of talking about sustainability, of course. We also developed a strategy that looks at, just as Bayer looks at sustainability as really a list of an inventory of business opportunities. So when we look at the 17 SDGs and the 160 some business opportunities that comes with them, we look at that as an inventory of business opportunities, with the fundamental belief, of course, that companies that direct their research to help on these issues and try to do as little harm as possible on the other issues, they stand to win long term and will be rewarded for that contribution. When you look at our business, it drives efficiencies, a lot of internal efficiencies. We have an anecdote that it's actually an old one, about 10 years ago. We decided that we were going to transform our electricity inputs from classical sources to renewable sources. And in some of the markets, you can actually procure green wind turbine electricity, but at a slightly higher cost. And of course, you're then left with the choice: do you want to do that and strip that from your margin, or don't you? The solution in our case was to do both, actually. So what we did was we said we're gonna invite a partner in to help us save on electricity, so energy efficiency. And then we're going to take half of that saving and put to the bottom line, and we're going to take the other half and procure green electricity. And I think internally there were a number of people who were a bit skeptical, but it took less than 3 years, and then we were all green wind turbine electricity. And I tell this story because I think it's a story about how the purpose, how sustainability actually drives a lot of passion in a company. That's a key point for me that of course we all around the table here work to create shareholder value in our different companies, but you don't really bring out the ultimate passion with your employees because of shareholder value. You do that because you create a story about creating a tomorrow that is better than today. That's a much more compelling proposition to everyone. So that drives passion in the company, and I also think it drives a better innovation that we eventually end up selling to our customers. Now let me get back to your question. I fundamentally believe that it has to start with the top, and I think a lot of the issues that I hear debated in forums around in New York in this week are issues that only occur because it's not anchored in the top. I think if it is anchored in the top, I would suggest that implementing sustainability or integrating sustainability in your strategies is no different from any other strategic change in a company. Then it just simply comes down to the usual tricks of the book, that you try to have everyone get to work in the morning with as much passion as possible. You try to rally around the targets you have set up for yourselves. You try to measure, you try to tell the stories about success and failures, and you try to learn from that. So my simple, I think it actually worked well in our case. That is to make sure it gets anchored in the top. And if it doesn't, then that's your key problem. That's where you need to start. And that's, of course, very easy to say, but I think that's a fundamental divide that you meet companies, and I'm sure we all are part of the same choir here, but you meet companies where it's not a part of the business. It's hidden somewhere, still hidden somewhere in a CSR department, and it makes it very difficult to integrate it in the business. And I don't think there are any shortcuts. You have to get it integrated with the very top. In our case, it's not only the management team, it's also the board of directors, the non-executive board of directors that are fully on board. And actually for the last 15 years, my short-term incentive, now we don't have a lot of that where I come from, so stay put. But what we have, 60% of that has an annual profit target as a trigger. But the scaling of it is all about hitting our sustainability targets. So I think it's not only about talk, it's also about making sure that you integrate it with your target setting, and you also integrate it in your measuring systems, and eventually tie rewards to delivering on these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Andy, you have a very global portfolio of brands and many smallholders across the world. How do you translate the intent, the strategy, into actions at the local level?
Yeah, I mean, I agree partly with what you said around integration at the top. Clearly, if you don't integrate it at the top, nothing happens. Having said that, when we look at our own business, if we look at our carbon footprint, we have the impact of a small country. We're about the size of Panama, so not the biggest country in the world, but for those of you watching in Panama, it's significant still. Our direct operations, which we're well on path to get to carbon neutrality, are only 6%, and so the real challenge is actually agriculture, and overwhelmingly smallholder agriculture. And if you want to tackle the issues of climate, of poverty, of human rights, of forced labor, of deforestation in smallholder agriculture, it's not simply okay just to say, we've got a strategy that we want to do it. You actually have to operationalize it on the ground, and operationalize it in a sector essentially where there has been market failure. We don't really have a problem in our US agricultural supply chain. We can be quite specific in terms of what we want and how we want to get it. It's a working with suppliers. You can put the programs in place on the ground. It's a whole different equation talking about palm in Southeast Asia, or talking about cocoa in West Africa. And so it's more tricky than just simply saying we have a plan. What have we done? The first thing is that we've integrated into our buying. So essentially, sustainability is combined with our procurement function. So you do that from the very top, because that's the only way that it'll be done. I think the second thing is we have to work powerfully with suppliers, and you also have to accept we have something like 60,000 suppliers. If they are all taking action, we will have a lot of action. But candidly, not every supplier is on the same page as us. Not every supplier would be sending people to this event. And we may be a relatively small part of what they're supplying. And so it's really about how you get to partnership. And that really takes time to get them to align when you are a small part of a business that they're willing to change. We've been trying this with palm. We've radically simplified our supply chain with palm. And when you simplify it, you can get to it. But it's not easy, and it really does take time. I think the final thing I would say is that I think it is the incentives are important. I also am incentivized around positive societal impact. And I think perhaps one of the benefits as Mars as a privately held company is that we actually have the things that for many people are boardroom objectives are actually shareholder objectives for us. And so we have formal shareholder objectives looking at not only financial performance and how well positioned the business is, but also positive societal impact, which is clearly measured and reported against, and being a trusted partner in society. And actually there's a shareholder expectation that the board and management team deliver against that, report against that, and that is being embedded into remuneration. But these things are really difficult. They exist because there have been failure, and we have to work differently to solve them.
Thank you very much. Maybe we should hear a little bit about your experience. Juan Pablo.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me just give you a very brief overview of what CVC. We are a Latin American company. We started as being beverage, and now we're in beverage and food. We were bottlers at the beginning. We are the oldest PepsiCo bottler outside of the US. And today we operate in 17 countries, mainly in Latin America. And we are pretty much aligned in the idea that to maximize long-term shareholder value, especially in developing countries as Latin America, we need to really integrate the community and the environment. I am working on a project in circular economy. We have a very ambitious goal in one of the countries to collect 85% of the plastic bottles as the industry, and doing a public and private effort collaboration. But one of the things that I think, to the point discussed, the challenge is that there are many different challenges. So how can we focus on the ones that are the most important and impactful? So one of the things that we have been working really hard with our partners, with PepsiCo, and the different groups, is to define and align and articulate what is the ambition and how can we measure it. Because before, we get lost, in doing many things and try to move the needle. So having an articulate vision and then communicating, I think building a compelling narrative where you can engage and align the different stakeholders. Because if not, it's very difficult. For instance, in the case of circular economy, it does not only depend on the effort of the private sector. You need to build all the capabilities and infrastructure. So if you don't have a compelling narrative, it's going to be very difficult to align all the stakeholders. And then I think another learning that we got from this initiative is having the metrics to really define what are the gaps and how can you close those gaps. So I just wanted to give you an example. We are in the process of defining the high-level strategy of sustainability impact. What do that mean for the group, and how do that translate into shareholder value?
Thank you very much. I think we collected already a lot of very good, practical solutions. I see there is, maybe you want to make a few comments?
Sure, I'd appreciate it. Just a few thoughts. I think to agree with both Peter and Andy, which may seem odd because juxtaposed you had some differences, but I do think there is a leadership at the top core component to everything, and as the BCG reports talk to in the Nordic examples, that fundamentally the boardroom makes the difference. And if you're still old school, managing sustainability out of the foundation and not pushing it into the board and the C-suite, it's just not happening. And setting bold objectives. So, Mike Corbat, our CEO, started with, can we do a completely renewable building in New York? And okay, we can do that. We can do that by 2020. Okay, can we then just make every building that city has renewable by 2020? And those type of mandates do tend to come out of the boardroom. Similar to BCG, perhaps even with more vigor now because we're in the finance business, we're looking at valuation and financial performance and metrics and modeling it every day in every part of our business for our clients. And one of the things you see is that there's E performance, S performance, and G performance, and there's absolute and there's momentum. And shareholder value is moved most and first by G and by momentum, and that is coming out of the boardroom. So when the boardroom starts to move and it demonstrates that movement, not on an absolute basis, but just that momentum basis, you can move value. But fundamentally, again, Andy, as you said, it is the supply chain. If you don't anchor first get your own house in order before you get out to the supply chain and the clients, you're likely to have problems. So doing the full net assessment and how you're doing as a firm in terms of your own house is core. But fundamentally now what we're doing is, and I co-chair on the bank side, there's markets equivalent of sustainability efforts of what are we doing every day with our clients. And that leads really to the final component of this, which is metrics, performance metrics. So Mike will say, if you can't measure it, you can't perform against it. And fundamentally, in this town this week, we're hearing, nonstop that the metrics are off. We just don't have the conformity, the standardization, whether it's a rating agency in terms of the systematic ability to look at a sector across the board with consistency, whether it's regulators and standard setting bodies, whether it's the big data and available technology that you mentioned that is there, but that's just not fundamentally applied in a way that is aggregating consistently to both policymakers, investors, and corporates. And finally, this is, and you say it brilliantly in the BCG reports, this is an ecosystem coordinated effort, and no one is doing this alone. And as soon as you sit down in Kenya and you start talking about doing this, if we don't have conveners that can pull together efforts like this, where multiple people, multiple constituencies are at the table, we just we won't succeed. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Jay, you set us up well for the next question, which is about how do we make these ecosystem plays happen, and how do we make some of these partnerships work? Many of you spoke about the importance of partnerships as to meet your goals. Maybe Michael, Dana, you can speak a little bit about some of the partnerships you're involved with. Michael, with MasterCard, we know I've been involved with the CEO partnership with Queen Maxima that you're doing in financial inclusion, but many other novel ones. Dana with Corteva, we know that there are partnerships with Nature Conservancy and others. Maybe if you both can get us started on this conversation, would also love to hear if others have thoughts on how do you make these work? Many of them are great ideas. They're maybe in pilot mode. How do you make them really work and scale?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for including me in this discussion. We come at this from a perspective that the only form of sustainable growth ultimately is inclusive growth, that politically and economically that's what we need to achieve. And for us, we think there's a great opportunity with the advent of digital technology to make the digital economy work for everyone, everywhere, as an on-ramp into the economy for a greater sense of inclusion. We've been on this path for a while. 4 years ago, we set out the goal of bringing 500 million new individuals into the financial system, people who had been previously completely excluded. That's scale, that's 500 million people. And we manage it, just to go back to your previous question, we manage it not just from the top, but region by region, country by country. Everyone's got goals, everyone's got programs, they're measured on it, we report on it, they're compensated on it as part of their overall scorecard. And interestingly, it's become a really great driver of innovation in the company, because it's forced us to confront challenges of new partners, low-value payments, things that the company would not have otherwise had to deal with before, but needs to do for its future. When the Trump tax cut was adopted, we decided to take 500 million of it and put it towards inclusive growth. It was a one-time event, and we were able to announce that to the street. And that's allowed us to build on this financial inclusion, but also focus on how do we more broadly help use our products and technology and understanding of ecosystems to digitalize the base of the pyramid. And this goes to your question. It's largely through partnerships. Our view is maybe we can help bring ID, for example, to the billion-plus people who don't have any formal identification in the world, but do so in a way that they control their data, they control their identity, how it's used, how it's defined. And through public-private partnerships, like with Gavi, the Global Fund, which we announced here at Concordia a couple nights ago, and UNICEF, we're using our technology sometimes for things having nothing to do with payments, tracking vaccines on the chip of a card. So you begin to have an electronic health record, for example. But it's also the private partnerships that you mentioned. And some of them came out of the partnership we have, or the organization with Queen Maxima on financial inclusion, with Unilever, where we're digitalizing the relationship between a micro merchant, their Unilever supplier, and a local financial institution. And what used to be invisible because it was done in cash, now a local financial institution can see the flow of funds between Unilever and its supplier and is willing to give a loan on that basis, beginning to bring that micro merchant into the financial system and give them access to credit. We're working with Rabobank to link up farmers, which it has great experience in, to global networks, help deliver subsidies to farmers, help farmers sell their products directly to market without going through a middleman. Some of these are in the pilot stage. Some of them only have a couple 100,000 people involved. But we know from our experience of the 500 million, because we're on the cusp of achieving that now, that we know how to do this at scale. and it's ultimately proving out the model and then driving it through the organization. The last thing I'd say is I loved your introduction about how, and your report on how companies that achieve these goals actually perform better. I think it's really quite dangerous to start setting up a distinction between shareholder value and other values, because I think companies are fundamentally driven by shareholder values in one form or another. I think we need to redefine shareholder value and how all these things, whether it's our employees, our customers, our consumers, governments and communities in which we operate, and their perception of us and how we contribute to helping them solve their societal economic problems. That ultimately contributes to long-term shareholder value, which allows the board, the shareholders, management, employees, all to be quite aligned in going after this.
I have to agree with Michael in terms of when you get in the area of distinction, it becomes fairly dangerous. But the company that I represent is in a fairly unique position in that we're not yet 100 days old. We went public on June 3rd, and we are in this process of creating our journey. I mean, and you know, we establish a very purposeful mission statement. It's to enrich the lives of those who produce and those who consume for generations to come. That is our mantra. That and so we don't have a sustainability strategy. We have an enriching lives strategy, and that the beauty of that for us is that it allows us to capture all of these different audiences that we've talked about, and there's a strategy for each of those audiences. But we didn't raise our hand and say, we're going to have a sustainability strategy. We have that enriching lives strategy. And the why was the most important discussion. So it did start at the top. It started with our CEO. But the why was around how do we reduce the risk for our business? How do we increase trust because we're a new company without a pedigree, without a legacy? And how do we create demand, which is that all-important part of making sure that our customers want our products. And that demand portion for us is twofold. It's increasing demand for our goods, services, partnerships, but it's also making sure that customers, we don't sell to a consumer, we sell to a farmer. Making sure that those individuals who purchase from that farmer want those products that they're creating. And so it is a real big ecosystem that we've created now. Having said all of that, we are a new company and have to have partnerships to move forward. We don't have the equity. We don't have the brand equity that our predecessors, Dow and DuPont, had in order to make some of those commitments to society at large. And so you mentioned the Nature Conservancy as one partnership that we have where we look at things that are within our core business. So that is around watershed protection in key markets where we have critical mass for employees. So it's obviously a larger societal goal, but our employees take place. They live in those communities. They help with those efforts. But I think about increasing technical expertise. I think about rice in Asia, where we've got partnerships there with CGIAR and others, where we're working to increase technical capability that will ultimately reduce environmental impact. So finding products, technologies that reduce the use of use of water in rice production. So it's not one particular segment for us. We do look at it as a holistic effort, and partners are critical in that effort for us, not only because we're new, but we're also only 20,000 people, and we're trying to feed 30 billion people around the world. That's something we cannot do alone, and we need that to move forward. So we are, and I recognize that that position is unique for us. And our journey is not going to be one that a company that's been around for 50 or 100 years can embrace, because you've got to retrofit some things in that area. We are actually starting from scratch, as it were, and moving forward. So it has caused me to have a tremendous amount of optimism. And I say that in agriculture. And if you can be optimistic in agriculture in 2019, there's not much to get you down. So yeah, partnerships are critically important in that regard.
So let me add a couple of flavors here. First, recognize my colleague from Mars that at least chocolates and the quantum computing are aligned on dress code. We are the ones without a tie, so good side. In IBM, we see the partnerships with a different kind of lenses, because when we work on CSR, sustainability, we do it with the same tools and techniques that we use in our business. So partnerships are not other thing than what we consider co-creation. So when we work with our clients, we start with user centricity, what is needed by the final user, and how we design that experience. And then you move into co-creation. This is not about imposing a solution or trying to push for a single product. This is about co-creating the journey. And then you deliver the co-creation with agility and in digital platforms. So being new to this sector, I was the chief learning officer of IBM until 10 months ago, and they throw me into CSR. So I am learning, but the first thing that I see is that in the sector, we need a little bit more of business flavor. As we all said, sustainability is part of our business. We also have to have the same talent that we have in the business. Why the head of CSR is not the same as the head of the most important account in the company and has the same background of business execution. So I think that that flavor on how we manage our most important clients should be used also on the way that we manage our most important CSR projects embedded within the fabric of our business. So user centricity, co-creation, deliver with agility in digital platforms to create ecosystems. Thank you.
Could I just add to the conversation? I wanted to add to the first point and also to the second, and maybe provide some inspiration for 100 days, because we're just over a year old ourselves, Upfield. And for those of you who are asking who Upfield is, we were known as the spreads business of Unilever and were sold last year and came into being in July. And we're in a unique opportunity, actually, of having a wonderful legacy in sustainability from a previous company, but also becoming a new company within itself. And day one, there was a new purpose for the new company, which was about making people healthier and happier with great tasting, all-natural, plant-based food products that are good for not only the health of our consumers, but also good for the planet. And it puts you in a unique position when you have that from day one, because you have a momentum behind it that everyone who applies for a job on day one really has to buy into that purpose. So whilst we clearly have management who are 100% behind the purpose, and it actually leads the strategy and has led the strategy from day one. So I'm a little bit of the opinion as well that it's not a lone sustainability strategy, it's actually horizontal across everything we do. But we have the momentum of 3,000 associates who absolutely love that purpose, and they're really the tension in the business of how fast we can go to achieve some of those goals. And so it's been quite inspiring for us really to take on some bold, and I loved the point about bold, taking on bold challenges. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have been able to make some progress that we have in the last 12 months. We were able to do things faster than the predecessor could, just because we were a smaller supply chain and we were focused on foods. And so we were able to become 100% sustainable palm oil this year. We were able to do 100% soy. We were able to announce a bold plastic-free goal for our plastic packaging, which we're working on. And for those of you who knows fats, know that's not easy. We've also been able to set up partnerships, because when you're a smaller company as well, partnerships are vitally important to you, and they need to be at the grassroots level. And so we had an existing program that just ran in Kenya. It was a breakfast program focusing on giving children a great start to their day, actually at the community level with schools. And we've been able to expand that to 8 other countries in less than 12 months. We've also been able to support women bakers in Southeast Asia who had no access to funding to be able to start their own business. These are just a small number of programs which many of you do every day. But I think the lesson that I've had, because I've worked for a lot of great companies, Pfizer, Bayer, Mars, it's like a reunion here today. I've worked for some great companies, but when you're small, you can do things too. It just takes the will of the strategy, the will of the company, the will of the shareholders, but also the will of the associates to make it happen at a good pace. So we're optimistic about what we can do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and maybe Jeanette will keep the questions directed at you also for the next one. I mean, many of you describe measuring and communicating impact as one of the very important unlock And what I'd like to hear from maybe you, Pia, with your stores, IKEA around the world, how do you make sure that whatever is measured is actually communicated to the forefront of the stores and help actually achieving more impact?
Thank you for having me here. Just to build also on some of the conversations we've had up till now, having the luxury of being a 75-year-old company, but with a vision from day one was to create a better everyday life for the many people. And then also having the opportunity of being a large company with everything that entails, and sometimes being slow because you're big, it's a big tank that needs to shift, but then also with the impact that that has, that when you start to move, you can change sectors. So I think the work we've done with the Better Cotton Initiative and with FSC to really move and change the sector, that's what we can do when we're big. But we also need to work small companies, big companies, and NGOs and partners together. And I think the benefit of the vision that we have is that we are a purpose-led company before we started talking about purpose-led companies. And that goes across the many co-workers. That's why people work for IKEA. And sustainability being part of creating a better everyday life for the many people, because you can't really have a better everyday life if you can't breathe the air, you can't drink the water, if you're not safe in your community. And the core of who we are is about life at home. It's not about selling things. It's about creating a life at home, because we believe that if you have a great life at home, you're better placed to take on the everyday challenges in your life or opportunities in your life. And I think that resonates really, really strongly, not only with our top management and our board and our own owners, but also with the many coworkers out on the shop floor. So it's actually quite easy to work with sustainability, because it's the one thing that really connects, no matter if you're in US, France, Japan. It's the one thing that really connects with our coworkers. And it's top 5 reasons why people choose to work for IKEA. So I think having that as the base, being purpose-led, having a vision, having values that are not in conflict with it, it makes it easier. And then, of course, being in 30 countries, you still have this global versus local. And there, we've always set out global goals, but we build them up from bottom up. So we have set out to fit with the 1.5 degrees we announced last Friday, and that builds on science-based targets that we announced a year and a half ago to stay within 1.5 degrees, which means absolute reductions by 2030 of 50%. And that's not going to be easy, but it's about breaking it down. And I think one reflection I have from the last few days of conversation, yes, we need to set maybe 2030, 2040, 2050 goals, but there's a lot of things that you can do here and now. And I think we need to break it down to manageable pieces, just like we do with everyday business. We don't say we're going to be a leader in X industry in 2050, and then we just fiddle around and see what happens. We kind of set a strategy, we set a plan, and it's the same for sustainability. And I think the luxury we have today, which maybe we didn't have when I started in this field 25 years ago, is we have so many reports, we have so many facts, we have the science-based targets. It's actually quite easy to measure today. And yes, it requires work, but we know what to do. And daring to bet also on the future. I think one reflection when we wrote our latest strategy a year and a half ago is, what do you want the future to be? And if you want the future to be a better everyday life for the many, then you need to bet on that the world will be electric vehicles. So we committed to having only electric home deliveries in 2025. And that was scary internally, because you make a commitment, and we made it now externally, and the technology wasn't really there 3 years ago, and now it's coming. And that's the same when we started investing in renewable energy in 2009. it was not as easy and it was not as price competitive as it is today in 2019. But we believe that that was the right thing to do. And now we've invested 2.5 billion euro in renewable energy, in wind and sun, and it's actually profitable.
Maybe Jeanette, in a new company, is it easier to establish goals and to track them than in a large, older company?
Easier when you work out what impact that you want to have as a new company, I think. One of the challenges when you unlock from such a large company is a lot of data, which we were no short of data. But how to manage with that and also make sure that it's pointing towards the right objective, the right impact that you wanted to have in the external environment. We could have got lost in the data, actually. So in knowing what data we had, we said, okay, let's just park that here. I think you were talking about all the different measurement tools that had happened over time and whether they were actually driving towards the right goals. We sort of had that moment. We said, okay, let's stop and think about this. What impact is it that we are looking for? And then look at today's tools and technologies and work out what measurements it is that we want to use. And so I think that's worked successfully for us, and it's actually simplified things a lot from those who were used to the legacy systems, because now we're quite focused on what impacts it is that we want to make. We've still got more work to do, because for those of you who knows how it works, it takes a while to get all of that data on board, and we have about 17 manufacturing facilities, and so we need to decide on goals for some of those aspects of the business, because the goal in the past that was suitable for the previous owner may not be as suitable for us, given our current supply chain. In many cases, we can go faster, as I said before. So measurement is something close to my heart. We've found some unique ways using technology, etc., to look at traceability, and we continue to do that, because I think it's very important to have the big, bold goals, but be able to demonstrate to people progress along the way.
Fantastic. Those two really different stages of companies and really helpful perspectives. For this last kind of main question, we wanted to start with you, Lucas. And there are probably lots of perspectives around the table. There are companies here that are in the digital space and ones that are trying to incorporate digital into their day-to-day business. Maybe starting with you, Lucas, on what is the role that digital can play? There is a sense that there are experiments going on all over, from using blockchain to get traceability, from doing innovative payments in refugee camps that are not cash-based, etc. So a whole range of experiments. Where do you see, and where does everyone else see, the future of digital in unlocking this problem?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I apologize for my silence. I have been speaking for several days now, and a phone call this morning was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on my voice. So if my mic goes out, it's not my mic, it's me. But I think to answer your question, the role of digital, and this shouldn't come as a surprise from somebody at Microsoft, but the role of digital is everything in this respect. I think it's our perspective that we fundamentally need to change the way that we monitor, model, and then ultimately manage Earth's natural systems. To do that, that means that we need to undergo a complete and total digital transformation of Earth's natural resources so that we can effectively monitor and report, so that we can drive increasing collaborations to make it easy for the companies around this table that share supply chains, that share values, to collaborate. That collaboration is going to be digital. It's required so that companies can take on these challenges that are so much bigger than any one company. I think the biggest learning I have had over the past few years is realizing that Microsoft may be a large company. It definitely is by, market capitalization. But if we were perfectly green, whatever your definition of that might be, and nobody else was, we had no impact outside of our four walls, then that's not a win for us, and that's not a win for society. And so I would just echo the comments from my colleague at IBM. I think for us, the way that we've made progress, whatever progress that we have made on sustainability at Microsoft, it's because we look at this issue through the lens of our core corporate competency, which is technology, innovation, engineering. Sustainability is an outcome of our business. It's not a predefined, well, I mean, we have a strategy, obviously, but we build technology to solve problems. Sustainability is a problem that we are looking to solve. And once you do that, then is it integrated in the C-suite? Yes, because we're a technology company, and this is a technology play. Is it integrated in our business units? Of course, because that's what they're incentivized to do. Am I on point for that as the Chief Environmental Officer? Yes, 100% of my incentivization is on our sustainability progress. And that requires driving significant collaborations across, I think we talked about collaborations externally, and it's hugely important. I think, all of us, it's just the way that the density distribution of carbon works. Scope 3, downstream and upstream carbon, is just going to be the significant contributor to your business. That means that you have to make partnerships and collaborations with people and organizations that you may have significant leverage over, and some that you may have very little leverage over. And those are really different and difficult conversations. It involves embedding it into things like procurement. It involves embedding it into things like the way that your partners make procurement decisions. How are you going to do that? You're going to do that by building digital platforms that make it easy for them to embed into their ongoing systems. I think I'd say one thing, we see it even in our technology development and innovation space. A few years ago, we came up with this program called AI for Earth. And it was the first principled program inside Microsoft dedicated to deploying our 35 years. And this goes back to my point about the core corporate competency. We'd been investing in artificial intelligence for 35 years. And this was the time for us to make a program for the dedicated deployment of it into the sustainability space. And we did, and we saw just incredible appetite from society in general, from significant customers, from societal stakeholders that we didn't traditionally engage with. We now have projects operating in more than 70 countries around the world, partnerships with organizations that we'd never partnered with before, like National Geographic and World Resources Institute. And it really has accelerated our continuing artificial intelligence innovation. So now it's become a core part of the technologies that we're developing and is pushing the products that we're releasing to be better, to be more inclusive, both kind of the types of organizations and the types of uses that it can be used for. And so I would just close by saying two things here. One is that I do believe that a digital transformation is required in the natural resources sector. I believe that when everyone starts working in that, we will make continually accelerating progress. And two, I would just kind of echo a few comments that were made here about this false dichotomy between shareholder value and societal impact. For those of you who read the Economist piece on this about the role of corporations, I mean, I'm an Economist fanboy. I don't think I've ever read anything in that magazine that I would, except this piece, that I would say they just fundamentally got it wrong. There is no difference. To think that you don't need, to think that society doesn't grant you a license to operate, to think that society isn't your consumer, and to think that shareholders don't exist to seek a return on investment from that ecosystem that you operate in is absurd. I think I'd never seen anything so classically wrong thinking about business from probably in my opinion, one of the most, continuously correct business publications. So, that's just something that I think we have to drive out of the conversation, fundamentally drive out of the conversation. Reports that you and others have been putting out show that this conversation that we've been having, which was so bothersome about, do companies that do well have a responsibility to do good, is, in my mind, completely wrong. Because the data show that companies that do good do well. So does it matter, right? Do companies exist to pursue profit, or do companies exist to do well? Companies that pursue profit successfully do so by doing well, or by doing good, sorry. And so we should just shut that conversation down.
I think you highlight the sticky wicket for us here, and so you're right. We've made a tremendous amount of progress as it relates to data and its impact on improving its sustainability. But I look across at Jesus, my colleague at Bayer, as an example. We both have a desire to improve soil health, work with our customers to improve soil health, and we've got a tremendous amount of data on our customers. Where we can't connect is how do we share that data? And so the next step in this conversation is trying to figure out that right platform, and it will probably be through partnerships to share that data in a non-competitive way, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure our customers have the best soil health, because that has so much of a downstream positive impact. And so I think you touch on it. It's the big question next is how do we leverage those partnerships so we can share non-proprietary data in such a way that it benefits society even more.
I just wanted to express my violent agreement with Lucas and the way he articulated it. I too am a fanboy of The Economist and the FT, and have found some of the lack of rigor in this debate a little surprising. But I also think, and Concordia is a great place to do this, we need to challenge each other a little bit on this. There's not enough foreign assistance in the world. There's not enough philanthropy in the world. There's not enough CSR activity in the world to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, any set of goals you want to achieve. The only way we're going to achieve it, the only way we're going to achieve scale in these interventions, if we are able to leverage the resources, the ingenuity, the momentum of the private sector. And the only way that's going to be able to be achieved at scale on a continuous sustainable basis if it is not seen as a separate non-profit activity, but as seen as core to the business. This has been a great discussion because every company around the table has found a way to make it core to their business. So I think this is a terrific set of examples. But I challenge kind of the rest of the audience because particularly this week here at UNGA, lots of great multi-stakeholder engagement. We in the private sector need to invest more in really understanding the mindset and the perspective of governments and the social sector, and really figure out how to help them achieve their goals in their way. But they also need to understand that they want us to break even or make a profit. Because if we don't, then the first time there's a downturn, the first time our CFOs tell us we need to cut back, these are the projects that will be cut. Right, the non-commercial products. And our objective needs to be able to demonstrate that we can achieve commercially sustainable social impact. Doesn't mean you make the same profit margins on this as we make in the rest of our business, but if it is seen as a hobby off the side of the desk, something that doesn't have to stand on its own 2 feet, it will never be scalable. And I find it very interesting in discussions with NGOs and others when they say, well, you're just in here to make a profit. And my answer to them is yes, and you should want that to happen. Because if I can't break even and pay for myself, then I won't be back next year.
If I may jump in to violently agree with Michael Froman. I think a couple of things, and Lucas, you said it just to start. With 90 trillion of money in the world signing up to PRI and $30 trillion of ESG money now benchmarked to ESG objectives, you're increasingly only going to do well if you're doing good. In fact, at a certain point here, if you don't do good, you will not do well, because the investors are telling us that this is actually mission critical and it's becoming more and more core. But let's go back to where I think the stakeholder issue is as well. And I would agree by saying think of the stakeholders as a Venn diagram, right? So the millennial consumer, she walks in to buy a yogurt, and she looks at Chobani and says, okay, they use refugees to do that, and I'm buying Chobani versus something else. She's also incrementally, when she walks into that institution or bank and says, I'm going to put my money there or not right now, she's actually saying, tell me first about your ESG behavior. What are you doing in terms of investing my money in sustainability? So she's an investor, not just a consumer. She's also an employee. And she's saying, hey, what are you, in my company here, I want to volunteer. I hear you're doing sustainability work. Our young professionals at Citi, they're coming out of the woodwork to say, how can we help? How can we be a part of this? And they're part of a community. They're part of a community that votes for governments. And I guess my point is that ultimately it is critical to have some of the business roundtable's differentiation about a total value picture. But at the same time, these shareholders are stakeholders in many ways, and they're not all different. But what they are doing is driving this extraordinary acceleration that is picking up speed, that if you're on the wrong side of history and you don't see how fast this is coming, that you can be on the wrong side very, very fast of it. And the wrong side can also be a government that thinks the way, Michael, you just said, because the math's pretty clear. It's, let's call it $4.5 trillion a year, of which governments maybe find $1.5 trillion. So the other $3 trillion is fundamentally about the markets, it's about the private sector, and it's about individuals putting their money to that cause, to invest with purpose in these causes. And that requires the partnership with governments, not governments telling us, well, wait a minute, you want to make money.
I mean, I think there is a lot that is moving in the right direction. And amongst this room, I suspect pretty much everyone who's come to this event are from companies where, broadly speaking, things are moving in the right direction. And that's great, but there's an awful lot of companies that are not here. We've got 650 or so companies that have signed up to science-based targets. We're one of them. How many companies are in the world? I don't know. 6 million, 7 million. I mean, the majority is still not with us in terms of moving, and you see that in almost every area. And if the majority was with us of the population, if the majority was with us of companies, if the majority was with us of governments, we would be moving more quickly. And so I think there is always a danger that, to some extent, we are talking to ourselves. And the question is really, how do you operationalize? And if you look at the Business Roundtable, if you look at some of the companies involved, really? All of them, are they really operationalizing purpose in their business? They've signed a statement at a very aspirational level. How far does it go down? So I think if you look to digital, which was the original question, was I think digital can play a great role in driving transparency. It's certainly a great role of engaging people. We see it certainly engaging associates, our employees' associates, increasingly with customers through platforms. In the field with farmers, it plays and there are certain technologies, particularly we were looking at GPS and traceability, where we see this as an ability to really get down to it. So I think it can be a great enabler, but the sea change that we're talking about has yet to happen for the majority, and for me that's the most pressing concern. So how does one use digital and other channels to actually make this, mainstream? And in many cases, governments are part of the problem. They are more segmented than companies. They are less likely to take integrated approaches. They want to talk to you in very much boxes. And even the NGO community, they're very fixated on their particular issue. It's rarely a total societal impact. So, you know, I'm pleased and happy with the progress that's being made, but I think it's a mistake to overstate where we are.
Shalini, if just 1 second to complement the piece of digital and the digital transformation. I think that especially in our area and when we work on how we impact society, there are a very important ethical part on how you use technology. And we are in violent agreement with Microsoft as well, I think, here. And there is a clear set of rules and ethical values on who owns the data, how all algorithms should be explainable and not black boxes that appear around there, and how the purpose of artificial intelligence is to augment human capacity, not to replace human capacity. So that piece is very important to have at the basis of how you drive digital transformation. And a little bit more of a philosophical point of view also. To advance digital, you have to have a clear agreement around open source and a multi-cloud environment where you can operate and integrate. If you go into a vendor lock-in situation, this magic of partnership is very difficult to work. So we believe in that. We just put $35 billion behind with the acquisition of Red Hat, the largest open source company in the world.
I just wanted to say 30 seconds. I completely agree with your point. I think the bigger issue, at least in the tech sector and the opportunity that we see in this space, is how do you reach those 6 to 7 million companies? And how do you change what they're doing? They're not all in our supply chain. They're not all in yours. And in the tech sector, what we've seen is you change things by making it cheaper and easier. And that's what digital does. That's the purpose of the tech sector. We all have our mission statements, et cetera, et cetera. They're all the same, cheap and easy, right? And so if you go to that same 6 to 7 million companies decades ago, I guarantee, before the digitization of spreadsheets, I guarantee if you had this same conversation about the chaos and dysfunction of the accounting system, you would have had this same conversation. Most companies had terrible back-end systems, most companies, and we changed all of that. We made it so much cheaper. We made it so much easier to do something that was important from a corporate perspective. And for me, we talk about these complex issues of sustainability. In some ways, you can compare it to this, what now seems like this very simple issue of accounting. And you see the transformation that's happened over the past 40 years. And that's the promise that I think digital technologies have in this space. So.
Thank you very much to all our panelists for the comments. I've been given a very interesting task here to try to summarize in 3 minutes everything that you guys shared. So I will not do justice to any one of you, and I will probably not be a popular guy at the outset of this conversation, but let me try. I think we've covered 4 challenges today that I'd like to just come back to quickly. First, how do we move from global strategy, global intent, to actually local execution and impact? We heard many different practices that I would like just to list without prioritizing them too much. First, it's clearly important, as Peter was saying, to see sustainability as business. Second, making sure that you get and establish very specific goals that make sense to the people that have to execute them. Defining a broad enough framework to allow local initiatives and creativity, and not trying to be too close or too prescriptive. Making sure also that you look at sustainability as a fantastic source of energy and innovation in your companies. The second question we discussed was how do we build coalition and partnerships that actually work? And I think it was important also, from what you said, to proactively look for others and people that are sharing your goals and interests in order to create the minimum scale that will allow you to accelerate impact. What you said also, those partnerships, they need to have a bias to action. You cannot wait for everybody to jump on the bandwagon. You need to start, you need to move, you need to start getting actions, and you need to accept non-perfect planning as you start learning from doing. A lot of the agile principles that we hear so much about, are clearly applying to the type of activities and initiatives that you in your companies are launching. We discussed a lot about measuring and communicating impact. That was the third topics. Clearly, many comments on the fact that it needs to be part of the formal targets of companies. It needs to be embedded into the incentive system. It is critical to measure in order to create resilience and momentum on the initiatives and not stop after the few first months where excitement is kind of running away. It's very important also of changing and enlarging the cockpit of measurements and being clear that you have to go from a very broad goal to a very specific set of measurements. And then sharing also not only the impact, but the cost in order to have a business proposition that people can endorse. Power of technology was the fourth topic, and clearly there was many comments on the fact that digital technology in particular can help make the journey to scale much faster, engaging a much broader audience in a more economical way than traditional ways, and making sure also that you can actually bring a message to scale in the many different channels that digital technology allows. So with that, let me hand maybe over to Shalini for a few closing remarks, and then I think we will have reached our timeline.
Great. Thank you again, everyone, for this conversation. When we set out to do the research a few years ago, one of the other pieces that we did was actually talk to many of your companies and talk to about 350 executives around the world to understand what works and what doesn't. And it's fantastic to hear so much of that resonated. We've, from that, created what a journey for a company looks like, and it's wonderful to see how far along on the journey many of you are. Andy, to your point, this was designed in a lot of ways, you are right, to be the group of people that are leading in this space, and you all are, and your companies are. We have seen a shift fundamentally between, if you think about the three segments, the leaders, the trying to wait and watch, if you will, and the skeptics. A lot has shifted away from skeptics to that middle bucket of the wait and watch. We want to do something, we just don't know how, and how do we move. And I hope that this group has provided that inspiration on how to actually move some of these, move some of this agenda forward, and also in some of the honest conversation you all have had in the real challenges, in partnership discussions, in actually bringing digital in and making that work, in measuring, et cetera. So really appreciate that honest conversation. I will close in our last minute by saying we built a framework of sort of 10 different things that needed to be in place. I want to highlight a couple of them that were consistent across all the companies from Japan to California that we looked at. I'm going the other way on the globe, so we've covered all the world, and everywhere else in between. The number one thing, and it is the definition of total societal impact as we define it, is integration. We lay it out as a Venn diagram. Historically, companies think about shareholder value and corporate longevity and CSRs to the side. We talk about combining those three into an overall lens for strategy for the business. And many of you have, quote unquote, violently agreed to this idea that it needs to be as a part of business, just as any other decision you are making that is strategic in the business. The second thing that came out consistently across all of our interviews was this does not happen unless it is, I want to use your word, anchored in the top. Without board CEO leadership, we have not seen a single case of success, of real success, come out in the world, and that is really critical. The third point that I would make is really around focus. We didn't spend a lot of time on that today, but it's our experience that one of the challenges, and maybe one of you did talk a little bit about this, one of the challenges that a lot of companies have is if you look at the portfolio of social responsibilities, governance, environment activities. It is a long list rather than a focused set of things that are meant to get to scale. There's fragmentation in the partnership, fragmentation in the activities, fragmentation in the spend that you all are putting in. It will be surprising to many people in this room about how much and for how many years the private sector has actually been investing in CSR. A lot of it has been ineffective. And what is changing now is also the recognition that things have to get to scale, and that partnerships will really unlock that. And the last 2 points I'll make is, one is the partnership ecosystem point that has been resonated over and over again. This, in many cases, cannot be unlocked. It is not a nice to have, but a must have to have ecosystem plays. And it is a fundamental business transformation. A statement was made when we did our climate launch this week that this is the largest peacetime business transformation that is likely to happen in the history of the modern economy. And that is probably what we are on the journey of. And treating it as that fundamental change process is what a lot of you are articulating. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I hope the audience got some interesting nuggets from this, and really appreciate everybody's inputs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.